Alright guys, last class we talked about the different parts of the flowering plant. You guys just did a lab that covered the different parts of the flower. What we're going to do now is cover a little bit of some other things that have to do with flower reproduction. Any of the notes or anything that you don't get today will be on the portal, so as you follow along, please listen to my voice, and what the things I'll say will be useful to fill in your blanks. But if you don't get the information, you can go on the portal. This video or the notes actually filled in will be on the portal as well. So as we look at the different parts of the flower, the first one we're going to look at is the sepal. When I think of sepal, I always think of a steeple. Steeple is like the top part of a church where the cross is that kind of protects. The sepal is its job is to protect the flower before it opens up. So it protects the flower prior to it opening up. And a lot of times, this part will actually fall off and die after it's served its purpose. You can see another sepal down there, but it's a fleshy material. Sometimes it looks leafy, and once again, the sepal's job is to protect the flower before it's open. Here's another image of that. You can see them here and here. Sometimes they actually will be part of the flower, the design of the flower, but a lot of times as well they'll fall off. In your lab that you just did, the sepal was actually still attached. The petals' job, their job is to attract the pollinating insect. That is their function. A lot of times we think of petals as being brightly colored and smelling nice, but it just depends on the pollinator. Most pollinators will be your insects, but not all. And so if you're going to attract a fly or something disgusting like that, you're going to need a different scent, a different texture. If it's maybe you need pollinated at night. Well, if that's the case, you're not going to need bright flowers because the organism won't see. You have a lighter colors and then a larger flower with a pretty strong scent. So the petals, their job is to attract, and just depending on the pollinator, usually the petals and the flower itself have co-evolved with whatever it is that does the pollinating for the species. Now what's interesting is we may not see some of the usefulness of a petal. In this case you can see the flower on the left looks pretty plain and boring, but when you look at it underneath under UV light, what ends up happening is it looks like a bullseye. And especially from flying up above, whether it's an insect or bird, both can see any UV light. They see that, they zone in, and they go in there for the nectar. They'll rub up against the anthers, and in doing so, help with pollination. Okay. The stamens, when you think about that, should be the male part of the flower. And the other thing that you need to know with this is the pollen, where it's actually made, is up here in the anther. So in your notes it says the plant makes pollen, the top part of the stamen, and we call that the anther. And it's spelled right over here, but it's A-N-T-H-E-R. This test sets itself up for a matching section, and so you will know how to identify the different parts, like pollen, which would be the small grains kind of up here, the petal, the sepal, which is back here, ovary. This whole thing is the stamen. The filament is what holds it up here. The anther is that top part here. The pistil, we talk about that as the entire thing. The stigma is the opening in the hole, and the style is that section here. All of those things are going to have to be known. If you look at at the end of your note packet, the very last page, there's actually a giant diagram with all those things. Could be useful for you to know that for our next test. The stigma, I think of stigmata, right? The hole in Christ's hands. The stigma is the top of the female part. It's the opening. And it's where pollination actually occurs. Pollination is the movement of pollen into or on the stigma. I always associate this in this way. Pollination and fertilization are not the same thing. A lot of times people want to associate those two things as the same. They're not. It's just like in animals, copulation and fertilization are not the same. Not all pollinizations lead to fertilizations, and not all copulations between two animals leads to fertilization. So just because a plant has a pollen grain that reaches the stigma of another female plant does not mean that fertilization has occurred. The next one that you get to know is the ovary. If you look down your notes, its job, and you look at it here, is to protect the ovum. And basically, what will end up happening is, and I'll get more into this, but when a pollen lands on here, one of the cells in the pollen, there's actually going to be three, is going to form what we call a pollen tube. And that's this thing that runs right through here. It's going to go through the plant itself, through the style. The style is solid plant material. Come down here, lead a tube eventually to the ovary, which will then go to the oval to allow for fertilization to occur. The pollen will travel to the oval and fertilization takes place. Fertilization is going to be the uniting of the sperm cell that's found in the pollen grain with the egg. That's fertilization. Pollinization is just pollen landing here. The next step is fertilization. So there is that difference, okay? Notice there is a difference. If fertilization occurs, then that's where you get seeds, which will be our next lab. Make sure you bring your lab book with you. All right, so here's that diagram as I mentioned. If you turn to the last page in your notes, page 6, you'll actually see this diagram along with the next two that we're going to see. I would almost bet $1 million, that you'd see a diagram just like this on our next test, where instead of having names here, there are numbers, and then a matching section that you would have to, with the letter A would be for pistil, and you'd have to know that this one right here refers to the pistil. So put this in here just to kind of give you a heads up, probably going to be on our next test. All right, when we look at the gametophyte, so the production of a gamete, it's different between male parts of the plant and female. The female gametophyte happens in the ovary, and it produces ovules, which can become seeds if fertilized. And then one of the things that we need to realize is that a diploid in the oval divides by meiosis to produce 4 haploid spores. And so just think back to that mitosis terms that we used. Diploid is the full complement. It's going to divide by meiosis, reducing the number to an haploid spores. Those haploid spores, one of those spores will be called a megaspore, and it will actually survive. That megaspore will then divide through a process of mitosis, making exact copies of itself. Remember, mitosis produces exact copies as each other and to the parent, and it will eventually produce 8 nuclei. And then one of those nuclei will become the egg. The terms that you need to fill out here, the first one, ovals here, a diploid, as I mentioned, diploid, divides via meiosis to produce 4 haploid, and then we call that one spore a megaspore. And that megaspore will divide again and to produce 8 nuclei, and eventually one of them will become the egg. And you can see that on the next diagram. Along with this diagram is in the back of your notes as well. Here's that diagram here. So that megaspore is one of the original that actually is picked right there. It will go through a process of mitosis 3 times, producing 2, 4, and then eventually 8. And we can see those here. One of them will become the egg. The rest is going to be the endosperm, which will become food for that egg cell. Why do we need food? When you put a seed in the ground, it's not going to be able to do photosynthesis, therefore not be able to generate energy. So it needs some energy to get the leaves up and running, the factory going. It's some startup money. It's a little walking around money to allow the plant to get going. Abood, wake up.